Welcome back to Movie Recaps. Today I am going to explain a horror, thriller, sci-fi movie named Cuckoo released in 2024. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. The movie opens in a house, where we see a couple arguing and screaming at each other. Their daughter is frustrated in another room, and she soon hears screeching noises outside, which causes her body to convulse violently. The girl then runs out of the house and heads toward a nearby forest. Shortly after, a man reports the girl's disappearance, but the other man doesn't appear pleased and states that another young girl is on her way, one who will be easier to control. The scene then shifts to a 17-year-old American girl named Gretchen. She is currently on her way to the Bavarian Alps in Germany with her family. The family consists of her father, Luis, her stepmother, Beth, and her mute half-sister, Alma. As they arrive at the destination, Gretchen appears unhappy to be here, as she has strained relationships with her family members. It turns out that her mother passed away recently, and she's been struggling to process the loss. Luis and Beth meet a man named Koenig. Koenig owns a luxurious resort in the area, and since both Luis and Beth are real estate developers, he has hired them to build another resort. We also learn that Alma uses a text-to-speech device to greet Koenig. Later, they arrive at their new home, which is located in the middle of a forest. As they settle in, their pet dog seems disturbed by something, and begins barking uncontrollably toward the trees. Just then, a woman approaches her and introduces herself as Dr. Bonomo. Koenig shows up, and informs Bonomo that Gretchen's parents are helping him build a resort. He keeps touching Gretchen's shoulder, which makes her uncomfortable. At her room, Gretchen listens to her mother's final voicemail and becomes emotional. She then leaves a voicemail for her. She mentions that coming with Dad was a bad idea, and she's saving some money. And once she has enough, she will return. Soon Luis enters the room to say something, but their conversation is cut short by Koenig's arrival. He offers Gretchen a receptionist position at his resort, and promises to pay her well. Hearing this, Gretchen promptly says that she's willing to take the job. The next morning, Gretchen begins her first day on the job, and is trained by another girl named Trixie. There's also Trixie's cop boyfriend, Eric, who pretends to be a customer so they can roleplay and train Gretchen. While they're talking, they suddenly notice a female guest vomiting in the distance. This worries Gretchen, but Trixie explains that it frequently happens around here. The following day, as Gretchen is playing guitar in her room, Alma appears unexpectedly. She tries to talk to her sister, but soon hears a piercing creepy sound in the distance. This causes her to convulse abnormally. A frightened Gretchen attempts to reach her sister. But then, she shockingly experiences the last few seconds in a loop. When Gretchen finally manages to reach Alma, the latter scratches her face. At this point, the noise finally stops, and their parents arrive to check on the little girl. The next day at work, Trixie notices the scratch marks and asks what happened. Gretchen reveals that it was due to her father's daughter and refuses to even acknowledge Alma as her sister. After this, Trixie informs her that she has a date with Eric tonight and plans to leave early, so she leaves her to handle the reception by herself. Later that night, Gretchen falls asleep at the desk, but is soon awakened by someone. It turns out to be a girl named Ed looking to reserve a room. Ed points out to Gretchen that she doesn't seem to belong here, and the latter responds that she doesn't intend to stay long. Just then, they notice another ill woman in the lobby who starts vomiting profusely. Gretchen tries to approach her and help, but the reception phone starts ringing. It turns out to be Koenig, who is angry with her for staying at the resort so late and seems worried for her safety. Koenig instructs her to lock all the windows and doors, and wait until he arrives to pick her up. But as soon as the call ends, Gretchen decides to leave on her own as she doesn't like that creepy man. She then locks up the resort and rides home on her bicycle. Soon after, Koenig shows up at the resort and gets upset to learn that Gretchen has left. He then pulls a flute from his pocket and begins playing a strange tune, as if to lure someone. Meanwhile, Gretchen notices someone is running in the same direction as her in the distance. And then all of a sudden, she sees a shadow following her. She sees a strange hooded woman aggressively approaching her. This terrifies Gretchen and she rushes to a nearby hospital. But due to her panicked state, she ends up colliding with the glass door, injuring herself. At this moment, Gretchen notices the woman right next to her, which scares her shitless. Soon, the cops arrive, and the woman also disappears. Later, while Gretchen is being treated in the hospital, Eric arrives to take her statement. She insists that she's telling the truth about the hooded woman, but Eric merely dismisses the incident as a prank and advises her to return home. Later on, Gretchen notices her family, who have brought Alma along after she had another seizure. Gretchen informs her dad of the attack, but he appears too preoccupied to care. Shortly after, Dr. Bonomo informs them that Alma is showing signs of childhood epilepsy. She inquires if there have been any recent changes in the house, such as new sounds or lights. Hearing this, Louise turns to Gretchen, believing that her jamming in front of Alma must have triggered the seizure. The next day, while Gretchen is working, a man arrives and introduces himself as a private detective, Henry. He wants to know everything that happened to her last night, but Gretchen believes he's a useless cop, so she refuses to talk to him for the moment. After he leaves, Gretchen is approached again by Ed, who is checking out of the resort. The two seem to get along, and Gretchen agrees when Ed asks her to go somewhere with her. Not long after, when Trixie arrives at work, she finds Gretchen, and all the money from the counter missing. Meanwhile, Ed and Gretchen are driving away, and the two actually plan to run away together. Ed reveals that she went to check on the sick vomiting woman yesterday, and saw her enter a pink cabin. As the two continue talking, they suddenly become stuck in a loop, repeating the same words and actions over and over. And then all of a sudden, following the accident, the woman pulls out the unconscious Ed and throws her aside. The hooded woman begins to shriek and try to reach Gretchen, but then someone fires a gun at her. In the next scene, Gretchen wakes up in the hospital, and she is soon visited by Koenig. He appears calm, but expresses his disappointment in her for betraying him. Later that night, Detective Henry visits her and reveals that he was the one who fired at the hooded woman and brought Gretchen to the hospital. He explains that the woman is wanted for murder, and he intends to catch her when she returns. Henry also promises to protect Gretchen, assuring her that if the mission is successful, he'll take her wherever she wants to go. The next day, after Gretchen is discharged from the hospital, she goes to see Henry. He tells her that a month ago, a couple in one of the resort's cabins reported hearing strange screeching noises, which caused the husband to faint. When he woke up, he discovered a blonde, hooded woman sitting on their bed. Her voice hypnotized him, leading him to pursue her into the woods. When the man eventually returned to the cabin, his wife had died from choking on her own vomit. Upon hearing this, Gretchen mentions that it's the pink cabin, and she has seen multiple women vomit profusely while staying there. In the evening, they arrive outside the cabin, keeping watch through binoculars from the next cabin. Trixie and Eric are seen inside having a romantic time together. But as Eric goes to get something for her, he hears disturbing sounds in the distance, causing him to get stuck in a loop of repeated actions. Moments later, Henry approaches the window and discovers Eric unconscious, while Trixie appears dazed. The hooded woman is also there. She's removing something slimy from her body and trying to place it in Trixie. But then, she notices Gretchen watching her and lets out a loud screech. Henry fires a shot at the woman, but she jumps out the window and runs toward the forest. Once the danger is averted, Gretchen and Henry rush to help Trixie and turn her on her side to prevent her from choking to death. The next day, when Gretchen wakes up, she finds Koenig at their house, excitedly chatting with Alma. Gretchen furiously expresses her disapproval of their involvement in the resort, as she finds they in a weird living situation right now. However, Koenig still acts kind, but he accidentally reveals to Gretchen that he had received a package addressed to her earlier that morning. Gretchen opens the package right away, and is shocked to find her mother's belongings inside. Luis is forced to confess that he sold their house in the US, and saved the money for Gretchen's future. Hearing this, Gretchen gets furious and punches him before heading to her room. She then goes through her mother's belongings, and discovers an answering machine where she had left several messages in recent weeks. Surprisingly, she also discovers a message left by Alma using her text-to-speech device. In her voicemail, the little girl mentioned how she frequently heard her sister crying and calling her mother. It turns out that Alma is unaware of Gretchen's. Following this, Gretchen emerges from her room to find her family missing. Koenig tells her that her outburst caused Alma to have a seizure, and they took her to the hospital. He then says he knows that she wants to leave this place, so he offers to drive her to the train station. Surprisingly, Gretchen accepts the deal without hesitation and writes a note to her parents. Inside his car, Koenig suddenly reveals that he works for the preservation of cuckoos. On the way, Koenig invites Gretchen to his home first, as he promises to give her some money so she can survive for a while. Gretchen is horrified to see Henry being held hostage by Eric. It turns out Eric was working with Koenig all along, and Henry is arrested for breaking into Koenig's property. He also reveals that Henry is no longer a detective after being fired for becoming obsessed with a case that is personally connected to him. Koenig then takes Gretchen to a strange pool room with a bed to give her money. But here he sprays her face with cuckoo pheromones, which causes her to become disoriented, and he quickly leaves her inside. After this, Koenig starts playing his flute to summon someone. He communicates with Gretchen through a speaker, telling her that he's offering her the opportunity to contribute to his preservation efforts. The flute sound quickly attracts the same girl we saw at the beginning of the movie. The girl approaches Gretchen, and immediately knocks her out. She then removes some slime from her own body and attempts to use it on Gretchen, but Koenig stops her. At this moment, Koenig begins to explain his entire experiment. The hooded woman is actually a member of a centuries-old humanoid cuckoo species native to the area. They survive by reproducing with a human host, just as cuckoo birds lay eggs in other birds' nests. It is then revealed that they use their high-pitched shrieks to hypnotize their hosts and implant their eggs. Once the human host is impregnated, they give birth and raise the child as their own. However, the humanoid cuckoo always returns to claim her offspring. Koenig reveals that he has dedicated his entire life to protecting these species, and also appears to have some control over the cuckoos using his flute. However, not all experiments are successful, and some women die during the process. It turns out that Henry's wife was one of the victims, killed during an artificial insemination attempt at the same cabin. This is why Henry is so desperate to capture the hooded woman and take his revenge. Suddenly, a gunshot is heard in the distance, and Koenig assumes Eric must have killed Henry. Moments later, the process of insemination is about to start. Luckily, Henry shows up, and he quickly shoots Koenig. Up next, he shoots the teenage girl before rescuing Gretchen. Elsewhere, at the hospital, Alma is admitted while Beth suddenly becomes very sick, so Dr. Bonomo administers a sedative and advises her to return home. In the next scene, Henry and Gretchen are planning their next move when she suddenly starts vomiting. Henry then finds a photograph in her pocket from Beth and Louise's honeymoon 8 years ago. The photo was taken at the same resort, and Koenig is smiling alongside them. This revelation leads them to realize that Beth was also inseminated by a humanoid cuckoo, resulting in Alma. It becomes clear that Koenig summoned them here just to get his hands on the little girl. Following this, the two rush to the hospital, where they learn that Alma has been placed in an observation chamber. Dr. Bonomo is monitoring the girl and recording the experiments when Koenig, who is still alive, appears. He reveals that the only specimen that obeyed him was finished off by Henry, and all his work has gone in vain. In a fit of rage, he shoots Dr. Bonomo and her assistant before proceeding to check on Alma. Witnessing this, a horrified Gretchen tries to head to the observation room to save her sister. But Henry grabs her, insisting that the girl is not her sister but a dangerous creature. Desperate, Gretchen ends up stabbing Henry with a knife before escaping. Shortly after, as Koenig is destroying all the case documents in another room, she manages to reach her sister. The two attempt to flee, but the hooded woman suddenly appears and starts screeching again. Gretchen quickly puts on her headphones and holds a knife near Alma, threatening to harm her if the woman approaches. However, the little girl misunderstands her sister's intentions and pushes her away, knocking off her headphones. After this, Alma rushes to the records room, followed by Gretchen, who is also pursued by the hooded woman. They all hide in the dark, and Gretchen manages to snatch a nearby MP3 player as the hooded woman continues to screech and hunt for her. But not long after, Henry arrives wearing the headphones and turns on the lights. This causes the hooded woman to notice Gretchen and she prepares to attack her. But then, Henry knocks down all the shelves, trapping both Gretchen and the woman. Alma somehow manages to escape the room, and Henry follows her, but he's soon intercepted by Koenig, who begins shooting at Henry. Meanwhile, the hooded woman breaks free from the shelves, and proceeds to attack Gretchen. Gretchen bravely fights back and stabs the woman in the neck, killing her. She then sets out to find her sister, but comes across Henry and Koenig in an armed standoff, while Alma is trapped in the same room. While both men reload their weapons, Gretchen seizes the opportunity to dash through the crossfire and makes her way to Alma. Gretchen then extends her hand to her, and uses sign language to inform her that she would never hurt her. She also reveals that her mom called her back because of Alma's voicemail, and the little girl is overjoyed to hear this. Following this, Gretchen calls out to Henry, asking if he meant it when he said he would protect her. The man confirms that he did, so the sisters then make their way outside while hugging each other, leaving the men confused. Koenig tries to persuade Alma to come with him so he can ensure the future existence of her species, while Henry demands that Gretchen move aside so he can kill her sister. However, the girls continue to cling to each other. Moments later, Alma covers her big sister's ears, and lets out a powerful screech, like her biological mother used to do. This hypnotizes both men, causing them to shoot each other, and finally end the madness. In the final scene, the sisters leave the hospital, and they spot Ed, who has managed to survive the accident. The three of them then drive away from the town, deciding to leave it all behind. The movie ends with Gretchen cradling a sleeping Alma's head on her lap, finally accepting the big sister role she had resisted for so long.